The warm summer sun shone over the streets of London as Gregory Lawson stepped out of his luxury hotel. He adjusted his expensive sunglasses and looked around with a smirk. He was here on vacation with his family, his wife, Linda, and their teenage son, Josh. Gregory loved to travel, but not for the history or culture. He liked to show off, act important, and make himself the center of attention. He believed that money made him better than others, and he didn't mind letting people know. All right. Gregory clapped his hands. Let's go see the famous Queen's Guard. Linda glanced at her phone. Buckingham Palace is only a few blocks away. As they walked, Gregory talked about how the Queen's Guards were just a tourist attraction. They just stand there like statues, he scoffed. They don't move. They don't react. It's all for show. Josh, who had been scrolling on his phone, looked up. I saw a video where someone tried to mess with a guard, and the guy got yelled at real bad. Gregory laughed. Please, they're just playing tough. I bet I could make one flinch. Linda sighed. She knew her husband loved to test people's patience. She also knew that his jokes often went too far. Greg, maybe just enjoy the sights and... Oh, come on, it'll be fun. Gregory cut her off. I just want to see if they're as unbreakable as they claim to be. Josh shook his head. Dad, don't embarrass us. But Gregory wasn't listening. As they arrived at Buckingham Palace, a large crowd had gathered to watch the Queen's Guards in their traditional red uniforms and tall black hats. The guards stood perfectly still, their eyes focused straight ahead, showing no expression at all. The sight impressed the tourists, who whispered about their discipline and training. Some took pictures from a respectful distance, while others simply admired them in silence. Gregory, however, was not impressed. He saw the guards as actors, not real soldiers. He leaned toward Josh and grinned. Watch this, he whispered. Then his eyes locked onto one of the guards standing near the palace gates. The man was tall, strong, and had deep brown skin. His presence was powerful, and even without moving, he commanded respect. His uniform was spotless, his posture perfect. Gregory's grin widened. I think I found my target. Linda's stomach tightened. She had a bad feeling about this. Greg, don't, she warned. But Gregory was already stepping forward. The crowd continued to admire the guards, unaware that one tourist was about to test the patience of a man who had trained his whole life to stay strong under pressure. Gregory Lawson had no idea that he was about to become part of a story that would be talked about all over the world. Gregory walked confidently toward the guard. His family followed reluctantly, unsure of what to expect. As they got closer, the crowd seemed to part, giving them space. Gregory was focused, eager to test his theory that these guards were not as tough as they appeared. He stopped a few feet in front of the guardsman, who stood like a statue. The soldier's face was expressionless, his eyes staring straight ahead, but Gregory didn't see that. He saw someone to challenge. Gregory flashed a smile and leaned toward Linda, whispering, Watch this. I bet I can make him react. Linda shook her head, worried. Gregory, please. Don't do this. But Gregory was already committed. He stepped closer, putting himself right in the guard's line of sight. The guardsman did not move, his posture still and perfect. At first, Gregory waved his hand in front of the guard's face. The guardsman didn't blink, didn't even flinch. The crowd behind him laughed, thinking Gregory was just playing around. But then Gregory took it a step further. He put his hand on the edge of the soldier's rifle, pretending to move it out of place. The crowd grew quieter, some people exchanging nervous glances. They weren't sure what Gregory was trying to prove, but it was clear he was pushing things a little too far. Look at you, Gregory said, loud enough for the people around them to hear. You just stand there, don't you? What a joke. Is this what you do all day? His voice dripped with sarcasm. Just stand and look tough. Linda stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. Gregory, stop. This isn't funny anymore. But Gregory wasn't listening. He was enjoying the attention. The crowd around them was starting to notice. People began pulling out their phones to record what was happening, unsure if they were witnessing a prank or something more serious. Gregory, still grinning, leaned in even closer to the guardsman. "What's wrong with you?" Afraid to speak, afraid to react. He laughed, waiting for a response. But there was nothing, just silence. Josh, standing a few steps behind, muttered, "This is going too far, Dad." Gregory didn't care. He was determined to get a reaction, to make everyone see that the guards were just ordinary people pretending to be something they weren't. The guardsman remained motionless, his face still as a rock. The tension in the air grew. Some people around Gregory started to shift uncomfortably, while others began to feel the weight of the moment. The challenge was growing more serious with each passing second. But Gregory wasn't done yet. He wasn't about to back down. "Come on," he said, his voice louder now. "I'm right here. You don't even have the guts to look at me." The crowd held its breath. They didn't know what would happen next. They only knew that the situation was about to change. Gregory's voice grew louder, and the laughter in the crowd started to fade. He stood right in front of the guardsman, determined to get some kind of reaction. The surrounding crowd had grown tense, unsure of what would happen next. Some people were starting to feel uncomfortable, but Gregory was too focused on proving his point. "Are you going to just stand there all day?" he mocked. "Don't you ever get tired of this? You really think you're a big deal, don't you?" The guardsman didn't move. He remained silent, as he had been trained to do. His eyes were locked forward, and his face was as still as stone. But Gregory wasn't backing down. He took a step closer, almost pressing his face against the soldiers. His voice grew even more mocking. "You know, I bet you don't even know what to do if someone really challenged you." Gregory continued, not noticing the way the crowd was starting to look at him. His tone wasn't playful anymore. It was cruel. The crowd was starting to feel the tension rise. They had seen the guards in action before, admired their discipline, and now it was becoming clear that Gregory wasn't just messing around for fun. He was trying to tear down the very thing that people respected. As Gregory stood there, talking louder and more aggressively, his family shifted nervously. Linda put her hand on Gregory's arm, trying to pull him back, but he shrugged it off. "Greg, please," she whispered, a little panic in her voice. "You've made your point. Let's just move on." But Gregory ignored her, eyes fixed on the guardsman. "What's the matter? Too scared to talk? You're nothing but a statue. You don't even have a mind of your own." Josh, standing next to his mother, looked at the guardsman with a mix of awe and unease. He could see the quiet strength in the soldier's posture, the calm in his face. It was clear that this man wasn't just standing there for show. He was someone who had been through countless hours of training and discipline. But Gregory didn't care. He was on a mission to prove something, and nothing was going to stop him. He took one last step forward, standing only inches from the soldier. "You know, it's kind of funny. I'm standing here, insulting you, and you don't even have the decency to answer me." There was a ripple in the crowd. Some people were starting to feel sorry for the guardsman, while others were angry at Gregory's words. But still, there was no response. Gregory raised an eyebrow, expecting the guardsman to react. The people around him were getting restless, but Gregory was too caught up in his own ego to notice. He had believed all along that the guards were just a performance, that they could be easily made to break. What he didn't understand was the power behind the silence, the strength it took to remain composed in the face of such insults. As the minutes passed, the tension in the air became unbearable. Gregory's taunts echoed in the quiet space, and the crowd waited for the inevitable. The guardsman remained a statue. The crowd around Gregory grew uneasy, and some people began to shift nervously from foot to foot. The moment was starting to feel too uncomfortable for many, and there was a quiet murmur spreading through the bystanders. Most of them had never seen someone mock the Queen's Guard like this, and certainly not with such bold disrespect. Gregory's wife, Linda, was visibly upset now. She tried to pull him back once again, her voice shaky. "Gregory, stop. Please, this isn't funny. It's wrong." But Gregory didn't listen. He was too caught up in his need to prove a point. He could feel eyes on him, and it made him feel important. "See," Gregory said to Linda with a smug grin. "He doesn't even care. He's just standing there, pretending to be a soldier. This is what they do all day, right?" Josh, standing beside his mother, couldn't help but feel bad for the guardsman. The young man had been doing his job, standing at attention, not flinching, and now his father was making him the target of insults. He looked at the guard again. Corporal Daniel Okafor was a tall man, his posture strong and proud, his uniform perfectly pressed. But it wasn't just his physical strength that made him so impressive. Daniel had been trained to withstand challenges like this. It was clear that nothing Gregory said was going to make him move. Gregory, oblivious to the growing discomfort of the crowd, took another step closer to Daniel, his voice louder than ever. "You really don't have the guts to say anything. What are you waiting for? You think you're better than everyone else because you're a guard." But still, there was no response. Daniel's face remained calm, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as if Gregory's words were nothing more than background noise. A few seconds of silence passed. The crowd, still watching, was beginning to feel more and more uncomfortable. A few people had stopped recording and looked away, not wanting to be part of this scene. Even the atmosphere seemed to shift. The sun, which had been shining brightly moments ago, now felt a little warmer, as if the day itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, Daniel moved. It wasn't a sudden, angry movement. It was controlled, deliberate, and perfectly calm. Daniel took one slow step forward, his heavy boots making a soft sound on the pavement. For the first time, he shifted his gaze just slightly, but his expression didn't change. The crowd instinctively held its breath. What was he going to do? And then, in a voice that was steady but powerful, Daniel spoke. "Step away from the Queen's Guard," he said, his words carrying authority. His voice was deep and clear, filling the space around them. Gregory blinked in surprise, not expecting such a strong response. He had thought that he could continue his taunts without any consequences, but this was different. There was no anger in Daniel's tone, just strength and calm authority. Gregory stepped back, his smirk starting to fade. The crowd, which had been uneasy just moments ago, now seemed to collectively breathe a sigh of relief. People glanced at each other, impressed by the guardsman's response. They could feel the power in his words, the kind that came from someone who didn't need to argue or fight to win respect. But Gregory still didn't understand. He had underestimated Daniel, thinking he was just a soldier standing at attention. But now, Daniel had proven he was much more than that. Gregory stood there for a moment, stunned. The sudden movement from Daniel caught him completely off guard. For the first time in the entire exchange, Gregory felt a flicker of doubt. He had thought that his mockery would break the guardsman, but it hadn't. Daniel had stood firm, unwavering in his composure. The words "step away from the Queen's Guard" still echoed in the air. There was no shouting, no anger in Daniel's voice, just a calm, commanding authority that made everyone around Gregory pause. The crowd was no longer amused by Gregory's antics. Instead, they watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Gregory's smug expression faltered for just a second, but he quickly tried to regain his composure. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. He had expected the guardsman to react, to prove that he was just like any other person, someone who could be provoked. But Daniel had surprised him. Gregory's desire to humiliate the soldier had only made him look foolish. The more Gregory thought about it, the more he realized that Daniel wasn't just any soldier. He was someone who had been trained to stay calm, someone who had learned the art of patience and control. That calmness wasn't weakness, it was strength. Gregory had underestimated the power of silence and discipline. As the seconds passed, Gregory could feel the tension around him. The crowd, which had once been divided between curiosity and amusement, was now unified in respect for Daniel. Even the tourists who had been laughing at first now seemed to recognize the true nature of what had just happened. They had witnessed something rare, a moment where strength wasn't measured by force or words, but by calm and dignity. Gregory glanced around, noticing the disapproving looks from people nearby. His chest tightened with discomfort. He was used to being the center of attention, but this wasn't the kind of attention he wanted. The looks he was getting weren't admiration. They were judgment. Linda, standing beside him, finally spoke. "Gregory, this is embarrassing. You've made your point. It's over." She reached out and touched his arm gently, a silent plea for him to stop. Gregory felt the weight of her words, but his pride was still fighting him. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could speak, Daniel's voice cut through the air again. "You may not understand," Daniel said, his voice now softer but still firm. "Respect is earned, not demanded. And if you show it, you will receive it in return." Gregory looked at him, caught between embarrassment and confusion. Daniel wasn't angry, but his words held a deeper meaning. They weren't just for Gregory. They were for everyone around them. A reminder that dignity and respect were more important than winning an argument or getting the last word. For the first time, Gregory started to understand. Daniel wasn't reacting because he didn't need to. He had already won, not with words, but with his actions. He had shown true strength, and Gregory, along with everyone watching, had learned a lesson in humility. The crowd, now clearly on Daniel's side, started to applaud softly. It wasn't a loud, boisterous cheer, but a respectful acknowledgement of what they had just witnessed. Daniel's quiet strength had won over the crowd, and Gregory could do nothing but stand there, stunned by the reality of the moment. The next morning, videos of the incident spread across social media like wildfire. What had started as a simple act of mockery had quickly turned into something much bigger. The video showing Gregory's taunts and Daniel's calm response was being shared by thousands of people, and the comments flooded in. At first, Gregory didn't think much of it. He thought the incident was just another joke, something that would blow over quickly. But as he scrolled through his phone, he started to see the reactions. The comments were harsh. People from all over the world were calling out Gregory's behavior, not just for insulting a soldier, but for crossing a line into disrespect and ignorance. One comment read, "This is not how you treat people, especially those who serve with pride and discipline." Another said, "The soldier's strength was not in his ability to fight, but in his ability to stay calm under pressure. That's what real strength is." Gregory's phone buzzed with messages from his friends, some of them embarrassed to even associate with him. His boss sent him a text, telling him that they had seen the video and wanted to talk about his behavior. Linda, his wife, looked over his shoulder at his phone and sighed deeply. "Gregory, look at this," she said quietly, pointing to the screen. "You're trending on Twitter, and not for a good reason." Gregory's eyes widened as he saw the hashtags popping up. #respect the guards, #calm under pressure, #lesson in humility. He had never expected this level of attention, especially not for something like this. The more he read, the more he realized that the people weren't just criticizing his actions. They were praising Daniel for his restraint, his dignity, and his quiet strength. In fact, Daniel had become a hero. People admired his professionalism, how he had handled the situation with such poise. The video of Daniel calmly delivering his message, while Gregory stood there awkwardly, had been shared millions of times. The comments were filled with praise for Daniel, with people from all over the world expressing their admiration for the Guardsman's unwavering composure. Meanwhile, Gregory's reputation was sinking. His social media accounts were filled with angry comments, some from strangers and others from people he knew. "I can't believe you did that to a soldier," one friend wrote. "You made yourself look like a fool." Gregory felt the weight of each message, each comment. It wasn't just his ego that was bruised. It was his whole image. He was being publicly humiliated in a way he had never experienced before. His boss called later in the day. "Gregory, we need to have a serious conversation about your actions yesterday. This kind of behavior reflects badly on the company." Gregory's face turned red as he realized the full extent of the situation. His employer wasn't just upset. They were disappointed. Even his family began to distance themselves. Linda, who had tried to warn him, now refused to speak with him about it. The tension in their home grew thick, and Gregory couldn't deny that he was at fault. He was embarrassed, ashamed, and now his actions were affecting not only his personal life, but his professional one as well. As Gregory sat alone, scrolling through the endless stream of comments, a sense of regret began to sink in. He had crossed a line, and now the world was watching. Gregory sat in his living room, his phone in hand, feeling the weight of the growing backlash. The social media posts, the videos, and the comments, it was all becoming overwhelming. He had thought his actions were just a harmless joke, something that would get a laugh. But now he was facing something far bigger: public shame. His friends, family, and even colleagues had started reaching out to him, expressing their disappointment. It was the kind of silence Gregory wasn't used to. For someone who always sought attention, this kind of attention felt much different. It was a sharp reminder of how far his joke had gone. As he scrolled through his feed, the comments were relentless. Some people had shared the video with their own thoughts, calling out Gregory for his disrespectful behavior toward Corporal Daniel Okafor. One user had posted, "It's not about being a soldier, it's about being a human being." What Gregory did was disgraceful. Another comment read, "Daniel showed us the real meaning of strength, calm, dignity, and respect for others." Gregory had never been on the receiving end of such intense criticism. His entire life had been about seeking approval, getting recognition, and having the spotlight on him. But now, the very thing he'd done to get attention had turned into his worst nightmare. The world wasn't laughing at his joke, it was judging his character. His boss called again. "Gregory, we need to have a talk," his boss said sternly. "Your actions have caused a lot of negativity, and the company doesn't stand behind behavior like this. I've received several complaints. We need to figure out what to do next." The phone felt heavy in his hand. He couldn't believe this was happening. All the times he'd made jokes at others' expense, all the times he used his sense of superiority to impress people, it had all backfired. Now his career was at risk, his relationships were strained, and his reputation was damaged. Even Linda, his wife, who had tried to warn him from the beginning, had begun to pull away. Gregory could sense the tension in the house. She wasn't angry, but there was an undeniable distance between them now. The shame that Gregory felt wasn't just about what happened in front of the crowd. It was about how he had treated someone who didn't deserve it. It took several more hours of scrolling through the comments before Gregory realized the magnitude of the situation. His actions had made headlines, and people around the world were discussing his behavior. They weren't just criticizing his words, they were questioning his values. Meanwhile, Daniel's image had only grown stronger. The video of the Guardsman's quiet strength had been shared across platforms, and people from different countries praised his calm, dignified response. People who had once seen the Queen's Guards as mere performers now viewed them with more respect. Daniel had turned the entire situation into a lesson in grace under pressure. Gregory couldn't help but admire Daniel from a distance now. His own ego had been too big to recognize it at the time, but Daniel's restraint had taught him a powerful lesson. It wasn't about making others laugh, it was about respecting them. As the day went on, Gregory realized that there was no escaping what had happened. He couldn't erase the video. He couldn't undo the damage. But there was something he could do. He could learn. As the days passed, Gregory's world continued to change. The videos and comments hadn't slowed down. In fact, the more time passed, the more people seemed to talk about it. Gregory, once proud and unbothered by the opinions of others, now felt the weight of his mistake everywhere he went. He couldn't escape it. Despite the public backlash, Daniel had remained quiet. The soldier hadn't spoken out publicly about the incident, and it seemed as though he preferred to let the situation play out on its own. However, people began to ask questions. Everyone wanted to know what Daniel thought of the whole ordeal. Did he feel angry? Did he want to call Gregory out? But Daniel remained silent, only speaking through his actions and his professionalism. Then one day, Daniel was interviewed by a local news station. The reporter, aware of the viral video, asked, "How did you feel when Gregory Lawson was taunting you in front of the crowd?" Daniel's response was calm, composed, and thoughtful. He smiled softly and said, "I didn't feel anger. Anger takes away from the message. Instead, I focused on what I could control, my own actions. My job is to stand, to show discipline, and to serve. I didn't need to react to his words. I simply stayed true to my training." His words were simple but profound. The news outlet quickly posted the interview, and soon, people across the world were praising Daniel for his wisdom and maturity. The tone of the conversation shifted. Rather than focusing on Gregory's disrespectful actions, the world began to celebrate Daniel's strength and character. Gregory watched the interview with a mix of awe and shame. He had expected Daniel to be angry, to lash out, but instead, Daniel had shown grace. He didn't need to defend himself or explain why Gregory's words had been wrong. He simply carried on, teaching through silence and action. Daniel had turned what could have been an embarrassing moment into a lesson that went far beyond the incident itself. Gregory's realization came slowly but surely. He had acted from a place of ego, seeking attention and validation at the expense of another person. But Daniel had acted from a place of strength and dignity, never needing anyone's approval to define who he was. Gregory had spent his life looking for praise, while Daniel had lived his life earning respect. Linda, who had been avoiding Gregory's attempts to talk, finally sat down with him one evening. She had seen Daniel's interview too, and for the first time in days, she spoke to him with a gentler tone. "You've been really quiet lately," she said. "I think you finally understood what I was trying to tell you. I'm proud of you for realizing the lesson." Gregory nodded, the weight in his chest lifting a little. He wasn't sure how to make things right, but he knew he needed to change. Daniel's response had taught him something far more important than any of his previous mistakes. The power of grace, patience, and understanding had shown him the path to becoming a better person. And though he knew that it would take time to rebuild the trust he had lost, Gregory was determined to start with one simple step: to show respect to others, not because he wanted to win their approval, but because they deserved it. Weeks had passed since the incident at Buckingham Palace, and life was slowly returning to normal for Gregory Lawson. However, the lessons he had learned during that time were anything but ordinary. They had changed him, reshaping the way he viewed himself and the world around him. He had been humbled, something he never thought would happen. The media attention had died down, but the lessons from the situation lingered. Gregory had spent a lot of time reflecting on what had happened. He had been so focused on proving a point that he had failed to see the deeper significance of the moment. In trying to break the guard, he had broken something else: his own sense of respect and humility. Now, he understood the true power of silence, of composure, and of grace. One afternoon, Gregory found himself in front of the television, watching another news segment. It was a piece about Corporal Daniel Okafor, who had been praised for his dignified response to the situation. The segment showed clips of Daniel continuing his duties, smiling as he spoke to tourists, answering questions with calm authority, and never once letting the attention get to his head. He was the very definition of professionalism, and his story had inspired so many people around the world. Gregory watched in silence, his thoughts drifting. He had been caught up in the chaos, the spotlight, the desire to be admired. But Daniel had shown him that true strength didn't come from seeking attention or trying to prove something. It came from staying grounded, from doing your job with respect and pride, regardless of the circumstances. Gregory knew now that he had made a mistake, But he also understood that the most important part of making a mistake was learning from it. The last few weeks had been a journey of self-discovery, and he wasn't the same person he had been when he first mocked Daniel. He decided to take responsibility for his actions. Gregory wrote an apology letter to Daniel, expressing his regret for what he had done. He admitted that he had acted out of ignorance and ego, and that he now understood the value of patience and respect. Gregory didn't expect anything in return, but he felt it was important to reach out, to show that he had learned from the experience. A few days later, he received a response. It wasn't from Daniel himself, but from a representative of the Queen's Guard, thanking him for his honesty. The letter was kind and respectful, much like Daniel had been. Gregory smiled as he read it. He didn't need to be forgiven, but the act of reaching out had been a step in the right direction. Life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but Gregory was different. He was quieter, more reflective, and more aware of the impact his actions had on others. He found himself treating people with more respect, listening more, and speaking less. His family noticed the change too. Linda, who had been so disappointed in him, now saw a new version of her husband, one who didn't need to be the center of attention, but who was willing to learn and grow. In the end, Gregory's lesson was simple yet profound. Respect must be earned, not demanded. And sometimes, true strength lies not in what we say, but in how we act in silence.